your hands won't stop shaking. The contractions started an hour ago, and this is the 5th time you've faced this terror. You're 19 years old, lying on a cold dirt floor in a cabin that smells of damp earth and fear. Through the cracked door, you see him coming, the man who owns your breath, your body, and your future. He's carrying a leather-bound ledger, the book where he records births like they are nothing more than tobacco harvests. You know what happens next because you've lived this nightmare 4 times already in your short life. He will wait until the baby is just strong enough to survive without your milk. Then he will sell it. The cycle will reset, and you will be forced to start all over again, a factory in human form. I'm curious, where are you watching from? This story, buried for a century, is finally reaching Lagos, London, and Los Angeles. Drop your location below, because today we unearth a truth that was never meant to be told. This is Virginia, and while the year is 1840, the exact date doesn't matter as much as the machine. A machine so efficient and profitable that it turned human reproduction into America's most valuable and horrific industry. They had a clinical name for it in the account books: natural increase, but it was anything but natural. The story truly begins with a celebration on January 1st, 1808, when the U.S. banned the African slave trade. Abolitionists cheered in the streets, believing America was finally taking a step toward ending the great sin. But they had no idea that by closing the door to Africa, they had created a monstrous internal market. The demand for labor in the Deep South was exploding because cotton had become the world's undisputed king. Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana needed hundreds of thousands of bodies to fuel their new, wealthy empires. With no more ships arriving from Africa, the Upper South states found a new, more profitable cash crop. It wasn't tobacco, wheat, or indigo anymore. The new crop was the human beings living in their quarters. Virginia, Maryland, and Kentucky stopped growing plants and started systematically growing enslaved people for the market. Even Thomas Jefferson, the man who wrote "All men are created equal," participated in this cold-blooded calculation. He wrote that the birth of black children increased Virginia's capital stock by 4% every single year. The 3rd President of the United States was bragging about human beings like a rancher brags about his cattle. But the textbooks hide the most brutal part. They didn't just hope for children, they engineered their production. Imagine being 15 years old and having a man examine you like a piece of meat at a butcher shop. He tilts your jaw back, checking your teeth for decay, and feels the strength of your hips with cold hands. He writes a number in his ledger, your market value, and then he assigns you a husband for the night. This man is a stranger, chosen only for his size and strength, forced into a cabin with you against your will. This wasn't a rare occurrence or a rumor. This was documented policy across thousands of plantations in the South. The Massey family of Virginia kept a stockbook for over a century, using the same terms for people and pigs. In those blood-stained pages, they documented over 350 children born, raised, and sold specifically for a profit. The ratio of women to men was skewed on these farms to ensure the highest possible birth rate every year. Some plantations even used what survivors called stockman men, selected for their physical build and hired out to breed. Maggie Stenhouse, interviewed in the 1930s, described how these men were locked in rooms with young women. The women fought back with everything they had. They bit, they scratched, and they screamed into the silent night. But resistance brought the whip, and the system was designed to break the spirit while preserving the merchandise. Frederick Douglass wrote about a woman named Carolyn, purchased by Edward Covey specifically to be a breeder. Covey hired a man named Bill Smith to father her children, treating Carolyn as a vessel rather than a human. Douglass called her the object, because in the eyes of the law, that is exactly what she had become. By the time you are 23, you have had 6 births in 9 years, and your body is a map of scars. Your first child would be 12 now, perhaps working a field in Texas, but you will never know his fate. The second was a girl, sold at 18 months. You try not to remember her face because the memory burns. The third never took a breath, and the fourth was snatched away before he could even walk or speak your name. You've learned not to name them anymore, because giving them a name makes the separation feel like a death. Now you are pregnant with the 6th, and you feel a hollow emptiness where a mother's joy should reside. This was the deliberate design of the breeding farm, to break the bond between mother and child for easier sales. In the Massey Stock Book, these children are listed as increase, the same way a bank tracks interest on a loan. The moment they could work, usually at age 5, they generated profit. The moment they could walk, they were sold. Mothers would return from a day of back-breaking labor in the fields to find an empty, silent cabin. No goodbye, no explanation, just the realization that their child had been traded for a horse or a debt. Delia Garlick recalled the day they took her mother, saying, "I never seed her again." I don't know what became of her. She spent her entire life wondering if her mother was alive, a ghost haunting her every waking moment and dream. The slavery law made this industrialized exploitation perfectly legal and socially acceptable for the white elite. Men like Calvin Smith ran notorious operations in Virginia, housing 50 to 60 women as breeding stock at once. His specialty was producing mulatto children, as lighter-skinned people brought a premium price at the Richmond auctions. He would often use his own blood to father these children, then sell his own sons and daughters for gold. The violence used to maintain this system was calculated to be safe for the pregnancy, but brutal for the woman. If a pregnant woman didn't pick cotton fast enough, they wouldn't just whip her and risk a miscarriage. They forced her to dig a hole in the dirt for her belly, lying face down so the whip could hit her back. This allowed the overseer to beat her into submission without damaging the invested capital growing inside her womb. Some women fought back by reclaiming their bodies through the only means they had: herbal resistance and medicine. They chewed cotton root bark or drank tansy tea to induce miscarriages, refusing to bring another soul into bondage. Others, like Margaret Garner, made the ultimate sacrifice, choosing to kill their children rather than let them be enslaved. Her story was so heavy and haunting that it inspired Toni Morrison to write the masterpiece known as Beloved. Harriet Jacobs, who escaped this hell, wrote that while slavery was terrible for men, it was far worse for women. She spoke of mortifications that words could not capture: the constant threat of assault and the theft of one's offspring. By 1860, the total value of enslaved people in America reached $4 billion, more than all the banks combined. They were the currency of the country, the collateral for mortgages, and the inheritance passed to the next generation. 1 million people were moved from the Upper South to the Deep South in what is called the Second Middle Passage. Half of these people were forcibly separated from their families, marched in chains across state lines for weeks. Richmond's streets were lined with slave jails like Lumpkin's Jail, also known as the Devil's Half-Acre by those inside. The air in these jails was thick with the scent of unwashed bodies and the sound of muffled, rhythmic sobbing. When the Civil War ended and the 13th Amendment was signed, the physical chains finally fell to the ground. But the silence began, a silence that lasted for generations as the breeding farms were scrubbed from the history books. The men who ran these operations, like Calvin Smith and the Massey family, kept their wealth and their social standing. They died in comfortable beds, never answering for the industrial-scale rape and trauma they had overseen for decades. The women who survived had no reparations, no counseling, and no way to find the children taken from them. Newspapers after the war were filled with lost friends columns, desperate ads from mothers searching for their lost kin. Searching for my son Jacob, sold in 1848. He has a scar on his cheek. One heartbreaking advertisement read. Most of these ads went unanswered, as the records were destroyed or the children had been renamed and moved. Today, those breeding cabins still stand in some places, often converted into museums that talk about architecture. But if you stand still in the silence of those dirt floors, you can still hear the echoes of the mothers' cries. This wasn't just a series of individual tragedies. It was a perfectly engineered economic system based on human pain. 4 million people were enslaved by 1860, and nearly all of them were born into a system that denied their humanity. Every single one of those 4 million people had a mother who loved them and a story that was stolen. The breeding farms didn't just produce labor for the cotton fields. They produced a legacy of broken families and ghosts. We remember them now because their silence has been loud enough to travel through time and reach us today. If you believe these voices deserve to be heard, share this video and help us break the century of silence. The truth is a heavy burden, but it is the only thing that can truly set the past free. Thank you for standing with us at Historical Tales as we unearth the stories the world tried to forget. The woman on the dirt floor is no longer just a number. Through your memory, she is finally seen. Never forget her name, even if the ledgers never bothered to write it down in the first place.